Hey everyone, welcome to Maritime Boom. I am so excited to finally be working on this mod guide. I can't believe the response to when I posted this video. I think I need to mod them. Here goes a test. Over 13 million views, over 1.5 million likes, almost 10,000 comments, I think. It is wild how much you guys enjoyed seeing the D-Dart Tempest get upgraded into this beast. And I am very excited to show you how to do it. Before I get started, we'll go over all the pieces and parts you need, and the lists will be down in the description. I want to talk a little bit more though about a couple differences to this build that may not have been obvious in the shorter TikTok videos and YouTube shorts that I posted. A lot of people commented to me, hey, did you see Adam Savage's build? Or he did that first. Whatever. Neither of us were the first to mod a D-Dart blaster, that is for sure. And I'm a big fan of Adam Savage, and he can absolutely do everything that I did, but I'm just a nerd in my basement with no skills. So that should inspire you, if you're a nerd in your basement with no skills, that you can do it too. You don't have to be Adam Savage. The blaster that he showed, even though he had 2 of these mounted on a helmet, he actually used the D-Dart Pro, I believe. He had 2 of those mounted on a helmet and a trigger down in his hand. Super cool, but a couple differences with this. You still on his build had to turn it on. It had to be on, it was up here, and once it was armed, there was a light flashing. It was super cool. And then he had a thumb switch down here where he could fire it. I'll turn that off. His obviously had more punch than this one. I don't remember. I haven't watched the video in a while. He definitely upped the voltage a bit. But one big sticking point to me modding this one is I really didn't want to have to turn it on first. Because just playing in the backyard or wherever with something that's running all the time, that's just going to be hard on batteries and motors and everything. I really wanted to do a 2-stage trigger. And what's amazing is when I was buying all of my parts from Out of Darts, I noticed a comment from B. Cooper that said, this kit worked great. I changed mine to have a 2-stage trigger so you didn't have to turn it on first, or something like that. And I thought, wow, that's exactly what I want to do. And I just became Facebook friends with a Brell Cooper because of a Facebook group I'm in called Nerf No BS. And I thought, it must be the same guy. So I sent him a note, and it was the same guy. And he sent me a few pictures of the internals of his. So a whole bunch of credit for him for helping me get mine into that 2-stage trigger territory. What is a 2-stage trigger? Well, that means there's 2 micro switches in here. So when I pull the trigger a little bit, it revs up the flywheels. When I pull it a little bit more, the second trigger gets activated and it actually fires. I love this thing so much. This thing is now exactly what I wanted. So I just go over a little bit of that just to say there are some differences between this and the Adam Savage build. This, from what I could tell online, is also hitting a bit harder. This has a 3S LiPo inside of it in here. It has the biggest 3S LiPo I could fit in it. You can get even more speed, but then you have to run a line and keep a battery in a pocket or something like that. And I really wanted to have batteries that I could actually fit inside of this blaster so that it has kind of a sleeper build to it. One other quick thing you might notice is that this one has a dart retainer on it. This one originally had a dart retainer on it too, but I had to cut it off because the D-Dart V1 wouldn't actually fit regular full-length darts. The D-Dart suction darts were a little bit weirdly short. I think maybe X-Shot darts would fit in it because they were a little bit shorter, but I wanted something that was more universal, so I cut it off. This one worked okay without a retainer, but once this one started spinning as fast as it is, darts were getting loose and jamming, so I 3D modeled and printed and attached a new retainer. I'm going to have the files for that down in the comments, and I'm also going to have a link if you don't print or can't print, if you want to buy one, and I can ship it to you. Last order of business before we get into it, I'm having so much fun with all this. I recently set up a Patreon. If you want to go there and check that out, I only have a couple levels right now. You can sign up. The first level, I make you an official Nerfing Maritimer. Do I have that power? I don't know. but I'm going to do it. The second one, if you join that one, I will name one of my blasters after you. A name of your choosing, as long as it's not rude and family safe, and I will name that blaster that forever. And I will print out a cool little tag that I will get Foam Blasted to help me with. I don't know if he knows that yet, but I'm sure he'll help me out. We'll figure something out. So go check that out. And also, a lot of people have been asking about shirts and hats, which is wild. I'm looking into that, and I'm going to have some of those available as well in the near future, as well as some stickers and other things like that. Enough of all that. Let's crack this open and make this blaster as good as this one. Let's go. I'm going to quickly go through everything you need in order to do this mod. First off, you're going to need a LiPo battery. You're also going to need a fireproof bag to store your LiPo battery. This one, I will put a link in the description. This is one I was able to get in Canada that kind of fit the bill. There's a great video on LiPo safety by Out of Darts. You should go and watch that. I'll link to that below too. This is the kit that I bought from Out of Darts. You could get all of these things separately, but this is a very, very easy way to have almost everything you need. One little extra addition you'll need if you want to do the 2-stage trigger like I have is you will need one extra little cherry micro switch, which you can get from Out of Darts, and I'll put a link to that below as well. Click, 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 click. Let's open this up. Here's everything that comes in the kit, and I'm going to add in that little micro switch, and we'll go through everything here. A pair of worker flywheels. We have a couple pieces of heat shrink. We have a new gearbox that will drive the ring on the D-Dart Tempest. We have these little 3D printed spacers that go on top of your motors like so. We have an XT30 male and female connector. We have some flywheel cage screws, our new D-Dart 3D printed flywheel cage, which will be replacing the cage that's in there. And we have 2 Kraken motors. And we have a bit more narrow heat shrink. And we have some red and black wire so we can keep track of the positive and negative. I'm going to put some of this aside for right now. Let's talk quickly about some tools that you'll need. You'll definitely need some wire strippers. You'll need a hot glue gun. Really, you'll need a Dremel. You could maybe do it with flush cutters, maybe, but man, if you're getting this into things, get a Dremel. You'll need a soldering iron. I have a Ryobi soldering station and it seems to work pretty well. You'll need a sponge to wipe off the tip of your soldering iron. I can't find my cutters, which is silly because I just bought some. So have something that you can cut your wire with. A heat gun can be handy to have for the heat shrink, but honestly, you can probably just use a hairdryer as well. I would definitely recommend helping hands. These are not very expensive to get. You'll probably use them in every mod project that has soldering. They're very, very handy. And of course, you will need some safety glasses while you're soldering. I almost forgot, you really need a number 0 and number 1 Phillips head screwdriver. Let's open the blaster that we're going to mod up. Here is our not very good D-Dart Tempest. Let's get to taking this thing apart. One of the reasons the D-Dart blaster is so underpowered is it runs on 4 AAA. So that is not a lot of voltage. These AAAs are pretty new, so I will be saving these. I didn't mention this before in my tools, but this magnetic tray is one of my favorite things as a place to put screws and other little parts as I am disassembling. 2 screws down here at the bottom of the grip. Flip this over. Let's take out this screw in the middle here. If you're wondering about the ring that I've cut off of this blaster, I have another video where I talk about doing that and why I did it. It wasn't very hard to do. I basically just took a Dremel and a cutting blade and I went along and I cut as close to the ring as I could. And I left these nubs because I hoped that someday I would 3D print something and this would give me something easy to glue and attach to, which I did, but I'll link to the other video that I did. So let's go through and take out all these screws on the back. That's everything there. we can pop this gray piece off and put it aside. We can also easily pop off this ring. This comes off very easily, which is really cool. A lot of people had said, can you make these interchangeable? Can they be quick swappable? Short answer is, I'm sure they could be, but it would take a lot of modification. One of D-Dart's newer blasters actually is built to do that. And theoretically, you could do this mod to that one that's already built to swap rings. The big appeal to me to using the V1 is I got both of these for $5. We have a bunch of gears and springs here. I would say just take these off carefully and we will go over how those go back in later. Don't worry too much about that. We will go over it. There's a little spring here. It's the last one on this little peg here. Don't lose this little spring. All those are away, and all of that exposes 2 more screws in here. So let's go ahead and unscrew these. So with the front screws off the grip and these back 2 screws, now we can take off this part. So we are quickly trimming down to the essentials of this blaster. We can take off 2 top screws in here so we can get this little protective casing off of the flywheels. Just like that. Put that aside. These are weird, not very good flywheels. They're very tall and they don't have a lot of crush. Crush is how much pinch there is on our darts to push it through, and these are very low. These are hardly squeezing the darts at all. So besides very low power to begin with, very low crush is affecting that amount of speed we're getting. We can take out all the screws in the side of the blaster, and let's get inside here. My goodness. I got every screw on the first go. All right. So here we have half of this. We're going to have to do some shell cutting inside and some major dremelling to make our new parts fit, but we'll get to that in a minute. Let's look at what else we have in here. Wow, this thing is dirty. It saw some abuse in its former home. We're going to have to do some dremeling here, remove some extra plastic. This screw is going to go as well because we want lots of room for our lipo. All of these internals can come out. We're actually going to use the switch in here. I used the switch in the other blaster. It seems to work fine. It seems to be able to handle the current. So we'll just be careful when we're taking this one out and removing all the wiring. So let's take our trigger and put that aside. And then we can just pull out all of these pieces here. Oh, there is a little screw keeping in this switch. Oh, puppies, what are you doing? I'm just going to keep this screw in here so I know where it is. So here we go. We can put all of these shell pieces aside for right now. And this is basically what we have. Now, in a few minutes, I'll overlay a diagram of the circuit for this. All we're really doing is swapping out this little switch with the on-off for another switch like this with a little push button. So when we hit our first micro switch, it turns it on, just like this used to turn it on. Our second one activates the gear motor, which rotates the drum, just like our old one. So I'm going to do a little bit of surgery here. All of this really is trash. We're not going to reuse any of this. I'm going to leave, and I would suggest you leave most of this intact just as a reference guide. I cut this switch out because we are going to use it. We have all the wire off of that, and we'll put that aside. We're going to wire this thing up pretty much the same way, except instead of this little battery tray, we're going to connect to one end of an XT30 so we can connect to our LiPo. And instead of this on-off switch, we're going to have a lever switch instead. This is kind of a handy reference. Don't go too crazy destroying it. Let's do a little bit of work and get our cage ready to go. So I've just taken these Kraken motors, I've set them down in here. You'll notice there are 2 red dots. The important thing for this is that those red dots are on opposite sides, because when you're adding current to this, you want these to spin opposite ways. If you had both of these the same way, you would not be able to feed a dart in through the flywheels. So they should be turned and be opposite. In this example, I have the red dot on the right pointed up towards this end of the flywheel cage, and the other one in reverse. You also want to be careful when you're doing this to try not to bend these metal pins. These are what you'll be soldering to, and you don't want them to be bent. And when we turn this over, there are some holes here for our flywheel screws. Very important to not forget to do that. And here I am too with something I forgot to mention that is really good to have, some thread locker. It's really good with these little tiny cage screws to use a bit of thread locker because there is a lot of vibration happening. You want these to be tight, but don't overdo it. The last thing you want to do is strip these. These won't quite be flush with the cage, but that's okay because they won't rub on the wheels when they're set down on there. Oh my goodness, I just talked about using thread locker and then I didn't use thread locker. Oh, that was way too much. There we go. We have all of our screws in. I'm just going to give each one a little extra turn. This is just very thin. It's printed without supports, obviously, and I just want to be careful when I'm doing stuff that I don't snap it. Now we're going to put on our flywheels. You do not want to put your flywheels on and off. So please make sure before you put your flywheels on that the positive sides of your motors are opposite. Okay, that's very, 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 very important to do that now. These are a very tight friction fit. When you're pushing your flywheels on, make sure you are not bending these tabs. You want to use the body here of the cage. Sorry, the body of the motor. And it will take a fair amount of force to get that down on. Basically, this axle of the motor should kind of come up about flush with the little nub here on our end of our flywheel. Definitely requires a lot of force. All right, these are on and they are even. I'm also just noticing with this cage, usually there would be a couple holes so that you could potentially pop these off, but there's nothing like that here. So another reason that you just want to make sure that you do this the right way the first time. So these are on, they look good and even. This part's all set. Here's a close-up of the cage. Here's where the motor posts, whatever those are called, those were those. They just peeked through the edges of my flywheels. That seems to be okay. And this is what I was talking about with the positive dot and how those should be opposite. You'll also see here right away that in order to even get this new cage in here, we're going to have to do some dremelling. It doesn't fit as is. We're going to have to remove these tabs here. We're going to end up removing a bunch of shell here and here. We're going to remove a bunch of stuff. Some things that it's really important to keep. We're going to want to keep part of this little support here and part of this little support here because we do want this new gearbox to have somewhere solid to sit and rest. So this little piece here, we want to be careful if we're dremeling that we still leave this ledge because we want that to sit on top of there like that. Let's do a little bit of demolition. I'm going to put in this bit here. Always have your Dremel off when you are changing bits. So what we're going to do here is we are going to take off these two tab bits here that are up here. We're going to make this flush so that there's a lot more room for our motors. And these little corner pieces that come in here, you can actually see these indents here. I'm going to shave down those a little bit too. You'll want to go really, really slow because you don't want to come out through this. But there is thick enough plastic there that you can take that down a little bit. always go really, really slow, just a little bit at a time, so you don't overdo it. So I think just doing that will actually now make our new cage fit. We're going to shave down some more plastic because it's not just our cage that needs to fit. We actually have to be able to fit the new thicker wiring as well. This now fits in there because we've removed that plastic that was holding it up. And I don't actually know, looking in there, that we need to take out a whole lot extra, but we'll take out a bit more. Another little piece as well, there's a little nub that sticks up right here. We can actually take that little nub off too. We can make this whole bit here where it's raised a little bit from this screw area here. We can take this little ledge and this little bit and make it all flush with the top of this plastic. If you can't tell here, if you actually have one, you'll be able to see what I mean about making it all one height. Goodbye, little nub. Let's take a little bit of plastic off of these little bumps here. Again, we want to be pretty careful because we don't want to go through this plastic. I want this blaster to look as close to stock as possible when we're all done. I actually think that's probably fine. I might round this edge a little bit. There we go. All right. We have made some good room here. While we're doing demolition, let's take out a little bit more plastic here that we're going to need as room for our lipo anyway. So we're going to take out this piece of plastic right here. We're going to take out this little ledge here. We're going to take out this post altogether. I know we're trying to keep it as much of a sleeper as we can, but we just need that room and we don't need that screw in order to hold it together. You can barely tell. We will leave this screw port, even though we'll take everything around it and even kind of shave off a bit of this circle. Don't want to go anymore because I don't want to go through that plastic. So now I'm just going to take out this little bit here. All right. Basically, we're just checking that we can fit this lipo in here, just barely. And it will fit. It just will be very, very snug. We might end up having to take out some of this plastic actually, as I recall, or don't recall, but we'll get to that. We do need to take out some of this plastic as well. We don't need that little nut that's in there as well. We're not going to have a screw port on our battery door, which I know is a safety thing, but we're way past safe at this point. I'm going to take my cutters and kind of snip this out. There we go. We'll just put that in our little magnetic tray. And now we're going to Dremel out the rest of this little bit here. And then all of this is going to go as well because our gearbox isn't actually resting on this, and we need the space for the battery. We're going to leave this post, but we can smooth down all of this stuff with these little two nubs here and all of that. We are making lots of room. I feel like someone will say this. You probably shouldn't Dremel with your lipo battery out. I had it handy here just so I could keep checking fit. So you'll see without that stuff in there, we're really getting to something now that with some wires bending, we can actually fit inside. We may end up shaving just a little bit off the side of this post even. Really, every millimeter will help when it comes to getting that battery in there. I know I'm doing the bulk of the shell cutting here now. I just kind of want to get it over with, or not over with. I want to get things to a point where you can actually be laying your other parts and upgrades in and seeing if everything fits. So it's actually kind of good to do this stuff at this stage. Normally you would do it one piece at a time, but you have the advantage that I've already done this. Another thing we are going to need to do is we're going to need to add a little wire channel here, just basically carve down in, oh, actually I think it's here, carve down in here and make a little channel for a wire. We'll do that in a second because we need to change bits. I'm going to go ahead and hollow out this little piece from our battery door. And with that gone, again, it's all about making more room, which we've made quite a bit more room. And we are going to have to do a lot of that same shell cutting on the reverse side. I'm going to quickly do a bunch of that right now. All right, we have our two halves with a lot more room and our cover. And when they all go together, it still snaps shut, but we have so much more room inside. Just before we move on, I just want to give you guys a really close-up view of what we took out. Again, we took out all the stuff in there, and that's what that should look like now. And in our trigger area, we took out the top little posts that used to be in there, or guides. We took those out so there's room. We took out a little nubby thing on here. And then down here, we took out this whole piece here, and we took out a whole bunch of stuff in here. So this is what this all should look like now. And the same on the other side. I'm also going to put in that little wire channel I had mentioned. And that should be plenty wide for our wire. I'm going to show you really quickly, before we get into some soldering, what we're actually doing here. We're going to have our positive and our negative wires coming off of these motors. We have our new gearbox here. Everything is, as you can see, very snug. I was just reminded we need to cut this little nub off this gearbox. Our gearbox goes in there. So our trigger here is going to go in a little bit and push in this switch and turn on our flywheels, and then a bit more and put in this switch and turn on the drum rotation. I've just moved this screw from the bottom to the top because we're actually going to use the same screw port down here. We're actually going to need to shave away a little bit of the micro switch even too, but we'll get to that. All right, everyone, we are back. We have our soldering iron heating up. We have a sponge to clean off the tip. We have a little bit of flux. We have some tip tinner, which I actually haven't used before, but the tip of my soldering iron is not in the best shape. So I'm not the best at soldering. I'm not going to give you a super in-depth lessons in a soldering. You can get lots of those online. What I am going to do, I'm going to put up a wiring diagram for you that just shows kind of where these wires are running. This is definitely based on some of the hard work from Project Nerf. I definitely referenced his at first when I was understanding how everything went together. I had to make a few little changes because we have that second switch instead of the on-off, but it's basically the same. So thanks to him for that. So I'm going to run a positive wire across the top of my motors. So one will be on the positive, one will be on the negative, and that will make these spin in opposite directions. Once I do that, I will then run a negative wire on the other half. One thing you're really going to want to do is you need to leave some slack in the negative, especially because we need to leave room for the gearbox. The very first time I did this, I soldered these across. I was like, oh, what a great job I did. These look so good. And I had to snip the negative wire in the middle and add in more wire to make more room. So you obviously don't want to do any more work than you have to. So I am going to use the method where I have stripped this a little bit with my trusty wire strippers, and I'm actually going to put a little bit of wire through this. In these little tabs, there is a little bit of a hole. I like to try to, probably because I'm not the best at soldering, I try to put a little bit of wire through there, so I actually have a little bit of a physical connection. So when I do solder this, it's nice and clean. I am going to use a little tiny bit of flux. I have my lead-free solder here. I'll give you a closer look here. I have that threaded in through the terminal a little bit. I've applied a little bit of flux. I have my solder. I am going to use helping hands. It's always just a good habit to help keep things in place. I've already forgot a thing. I want to put these little guys on here. Cut a little bit more off because I started to do this and I realized I didn't have my little printed piece on there, which I want to have on because I do like something in between the bit of solder, those motor spacers. So we've wrapped that around. We've put our helping hands there. I'm going to put a little tiny bit of flux on here. We're going to tin the tip a little bit. I wasn't lying when I told you guys that I'm not very good at soldering, but that is pretty sturdy there. I am going to kind of kink this a little bit to give me some room. I may have left a little too much space there. All right, so we're going to put our second little motor spacer on there. So I'm going to take this one and all of these bits of wire, I'm actually going to put the little tab in between this wire just to help make a little bit of a physical connection. I am going to use my helping hands here to just push that in a little bit. So we will use a little tiny bit of flux. You definitely should not be watching me for actual soldering tips. Well, that's not going anywhere. You'll notice I didn't cut this. I'm just going to kind of thread things along through as we go. I'm going to do the same to our negative. Again, we can use our old one as a bit of a guide here too. Now, I have my wires going the other way, strictly because I did that last time. What matters is that your red is on the top here with the cage pointed up like that, and your negative is on the bottom. It's also important too because there's not a ton of room. It's also very important that your solder, if you're kind of a beginner or not very good at soldering like me, it's very important that your solder is not too big and blobby because it needs to fit in the in here. So I'm gonna get this one on, and then once I get this one on, I'm actually going to I'm just gonna do a check for fit. And then again, we will put that here, just keeping in mind that this is going to go here. So if you can see that, and we're going to want enough room for this wire to kind of go down and around. In fact, let me just kind of fit this in here to show you. That goes in there. And this will kind of go around. This will go around this guy and sneak in around the other side. So we'll give kind of a decent amount of slack there. A lot of the fun of this is figuring out your lengths and your distances to make all these pieces fit. So we put this in here. This is all fine, but we need to have enough slack to go down, loop around, and then get to that tab so that we can have this gearbox nestle in there like that. And we want enough room that we can make sure that this isn't interfering with everything. And we'll probably end up hot gluing some pieces in place. We might have to make another little wider wire channel down here. Basically, I've measured out, and I'm doing something silly where I'm doing it a little bit differently than I did it last time. But I think this is better. This is around around 6 inches of slack from this lead, which is quite a bit of, I know, but I'm just going to strip away some of this. I try not to cut the wire if I can help it until I need to. When this all kind of goes in here and wraps around, it's going to be coming back in across this way. We'll get some helping hands to hold that down. We will flux this a little tiny bit. The art of getting solder to flow is pretty tricky. There are times where I feel like maybe my iron doesn't quite get hot enough, but it's a pretty decent one, so I tend to think the problem is still me in my inexperience. But we get by. Okay. We're burning some plastic there. Probably gonna end up putting some shrink on this one because I don't want you don't want your wires touching your cage. A little bit of shrink and put that on there so that we can just kind of get that on there so that we have a little bit of a guard in between our solder here and our motor. Next up, I don't know why I'm doing the negative first. I guess because it's a little easier. We're going to bring this negative wire down to here. This seems to give us quite a bit of room, maybe even more room than we need. Sometimes too much room is not great because it's just more wire to take up space. So I have in the end grabbed another roughly 3 inches of slack from here, and I'm going to slice this back a bit. And again, I'm kind of using, I mean, I know I showed that wiring diagram, but really I'm using the guts of my old one as a bit of a guide. The wiring for most of this is exactly the same. I tend to do a lot of fitting as I go, just to try and make sure that I'm not overlooking some big obvious thing. And I kind of like to have an idea of where my wire needs to go, where it needs to go next, so that when I'm soldering it on, I'm keeping that in mind too. Like with this one, my next stop for my gearbox here is down because I'll be heading towards an XT60 connector. Oh, this tab got very bent. These tabs are very, very delicate. Does not take much to bend one. And we have a lot of plastic here too, so I mean, if you're not an exceptionally strong solderer, like I am not, you do really have to be careful that you don't melt or wreck anything. Looks like my bit of heat shrink actually fell off. It's kind of a good idea when you're working on stuff like this to put a little bit of shrink around lots of different areas or any wire that you're about to do something to, in case you need to do that after. It's a good idea. That like that. We use a little bit of flux. And by some miracle, a pretty clean solder joint there. And I have this, once it cools down, I'll probably heat shrink that down just to keep it all snug. So again, if we're looking at this, again, for how it'll be oriented here, your negatives are at the back of the blaster, your positives are at the front, and this negative goes to the bottom. If this gear is faced, this is your rear drive here. This negative is at the bottom. The next stop for the negative is actually to the battery. So it's actually a pretty simple wiring job for the negative. Next up, this wire is going to go to the middle of our rev switch.
Put that in there.
So for length of cord wire, we don't need a whole lot. So we have, I'm gonna try to do a few measurements for you guys. So I would say about 2 3/4 inches, almost 3 inches. We are going to strip away a little bit of our insulation. And this is one of those times where we are not going to cut it, because we're just going to keep this wire going to our next switch, which is going to go to the bottom of the next switch. I'll show you here. So in an ideal world, this will go up. We'll kind of separate this a little bit, and we will solder this. This is where helping hands are very helpful. Well, not fantastic, but not going anywhere. So we're going to go up to the bottom of this one. So we're not going very far. This is actually going to sit like kind of like this. So we are really not going far. This is not a wire cutter. Judge me if you will. The other thing I'm going to do while I'm here is I'm going to kind of wiring things a little bit out of sequence. Shame on me, but at least I'm showing you how to do it, I guess. All right. I am going to run from this switch that turns the flywheels on and off. I'm going to run that down. I'm going to run that down here. We'll eventually add our XT30. So just as an FYI, the cool thing now is this stuff is all related to the geared motor for driving the drum. This is basically, once we hook this up to a battery, this would already, in theory, turn the flywheels. Which, why don't we do that? It's always good to test with a handy 9-volt. If you're going to test with a 9-volt, you basically just take your positive. I'm just going to put a little bit of tape on there. You take your negative. Like so. And the reason we use a 9-volt is we don't want to use a LiPo. A LiPo is so powerful, we don't want to fry everything. This should make the flywheels go. Okay, so the good news is we uncovered a pretty big issue. That was, man, flywheels are very hard to get off. Luckily, using this screwdriver and this nylon pry, honestly, it would have been better to use 2 nylon pries, but I didn't have 2 that fit, and I was getting tired of messing around with it. So this motor is in here crooked. So what that means is it was rubbing. So when I was doing my little test, it was not working, which is incredibly stressful. Yeah, because the last thing you want to do is burn one of these out. Oh, wow. There was some junky filament in here inside of the print from it bridging that little bit of extra plastic that was hanging down, because this was printed without supports, which, you know, is normal for something like this. But the problem is, oh wow, the problem is, because that was on one side, I didn't notice, and it was making this crooked. This is something that I will always check for now. That is now flat. Now they are perfect. Let's get this wire to our trigger switch. This is going to go to the bottom of this. It's really, really, really not going far. They're practically going to overlap. They're in here like so. So I'm probably going to cut more of this off with my not wire cutters. Strip a bit of this. And then we're going to loop this. Oh, make a little loop. Get our helping hands here. Let's flux it. That will do. We're going to go from this middle one now down to this. I really wish it had those holes that the other switches I had. Spacing wise, that's there, that's there. This comes down by here. All right, just so you can see this, we go from positive along the motors down to the middle, from the middle to the bottom of this one, and then from the middle of this one to the gear motor. And then the bottom one on this switch will go to the XT60, or sorry, XT30. Down here, I'm going to make a little loop. In here, I just want to give myself lots of room. Just taking this bottom piece off so I don't melt it. I'm going to use my helping hands over here and over here. We'll do this, then we'll do one more test to make sure we are wired correctly. And once we do that test, we will solder on the XT30 connector for our LiPo. And then we have to create a mount for this extra switch. But I already have a plan for that, luckily. wired up and working. Everything works. Time to do one of the most fun tests that there is, which is feed a dart through and make sure everything's going the right way, which it is. Both my triggers are working. All of the wiring is working. Let's get to the kind of weird part now of getting everything mounted in the shell. I did a bit of a number on part of that cage when I was popping off that motor that was on crooked. Whoops. Oh well. Dremel is live. I'm going to put on some safety glasses right away so I don't forget. I am going to have to Dremel a bunch of space out of this or else the flywheels rub. We'll do that after. And I'm going to reveal to you a couple secret ingredients for this blaster on the inside. You guys know how much I love knockouts. It turns out that some knockout parts are the secret sauce that I use. You don't have to use knockout parts. I just happen to have a couple knockouts that are kind of busted. And there's a rod inside and there's the little plastic nub of the safety. Those two things are kind of the perfect size for some pieces that I need to put inside this. So, and plus it amuses me to say that there's a bit of knockout inside of these. Let's get everything else kind of fitted in. Make sure things are in the channels they should be in. I'll try to put this wire underneath. That works just fine. All right. Here's something we're going to have to do. We're actually going to have to shave down the corner of this switch a little bit for it to do what we want it to do. Because things are pretty snug in here. Oh, I should have had this coming off the top of this switch. Oh dear. It'll work. It'll work. I want to go kind of easy here. I definitely don't want to get in anything that's not just plastic. So we're actually going to use this same screw port for this. We've changed which screw. We've changed the screw for this. This is the original D-Dart switch. The screw for this used to be in the bottom one. Now it is in the top one. Oh man, maybe I can change it. I really wish this red wire here, instead of kind of being pointed down, was pointed up. The one in the middle. It's just, space is really at a premium. We'll see. It might be okay. I definitely in this one, compared to my other one, left a bit more slack. I feel like the second time you do something is usually not better. Huh. It's not very clicky, and I think the reason why is because there's so much wire in there. Oh boy. Okay. I definitely left too much slack. We actually need to take a bit more off the corner of this switch because we need this click. See how there's some slack there? We need this click, this first click, because this is our flywheels. We need this click to happen right away. So we can't have that dead space. There we go. So we're getting click, and then we still have a bit more we can push. And we need that for the second stage. We will figure out where all these wires are going to go in there. I know that we can do it. The pieces that I have found are handy for this are that. And I will cut a piece off of that. This piece will actually get added to the trigger. And again, any piece of plastic could do. Don't cut towards your hands like I just did. I'm just going to clean this up a little bit. We're going to glue this on like this so that when the trigger goes in, this switch will be above and then this will push in this switch. Pretty simple. We'll sand this down a little bit before we use it, and we will probably hot glue it on somewhere like this. We'll wait and do this once we have a final position. I'm going to put this little bra for the motor back on before I forget. And then what we're going to do here is this fits through this hole quite nicely. So we are going to make a little post. We're going to hot glue it in place. I did epoxy in the last one, but I think hot glue would be just fine for this. So we're just going to take this cutter and we're going to cut off this nub and cut up here, and then we'll have a little post. When my friend Brell did his two-stage trigger, I know he kind of filled in here and he built up layer by layer and he built a switch plate. But it did trap everything in. I kind of like the idea that if I needed to, I can take everything out and back apart and service it. That's gonna be hot. There we go. I'm kind of let this, let's see here. I'm trying to remember if I use the upper or lower. That's still very, it's cooling down now. I think I used the upper. Nope. I think I used the lower. I think this went in kind of like this. And then this was up here. So for the height of it, I'm just sitting this up here. The height is, we're just going to cut this right here. If it's a little longer, that's okay. Definitely need to be very careful doing this. That is very hot now. We're going to let it cool for a minute. I'm going to plug in my hot glue gun. I'm going to unscrew this because there's an area in here that I'm just going to fill with glue so that it's nice and solid. So in here, I'm going to fill that whole area with glue. I'm going to put in my post like so. I'm actually going to, let's do a combo. So here is some quick set JB Weld. And there we go. We will just hold that for a few minutes. Let's just add a tiny bit more of that, and then we'll give it a minute and I'll fill that with hot glue. Let's give that a chance to dry and set, and let's do some more dremelling. We might as well do it now while we wait. We actually need to reduce this a fair bit. A lot of this needs to go, and some of this needs to go, and some of these posts need to go as well. That should be enough room now in this little flywheel cage protector for our worker flywheels. Back to the hot glue. Okay, that's pretty firm in there. That's awesome. We need to figure out, actually we do need our Dremel again. I think we need to make another wire channel. Go here. Let's make sure not to cut through any of our wires. I'm just going to do a slice down through here and make a little channel. Let's see. We need to figure out the final positioning of this stuff so I can get the triggers in. You know what I might have to do? I might have to take out my heat gun. We're going to cover some of my messiness there with the shrink. And that will take a minute to cool. Those in that channel I made. That's pretty good. Okay, this is good so far. We have a lot less wire hanging around on this side, which was making our trigger stick. So we're going to screw this one into position. It's pretty tight and it's shifting my gearbox into a weird position here. There is a good chance I am going to have to maybe on-solder this point so that it's a little easier to work with. We'll see. Oh no. Oh no. No, it can't be. I was gonna say, is this switch thicker than my other one? But I don't think so. Definitely having some trouble getting this to line up. I can probably take a little bit more off the corner of the switch. Just don't want to go too crazy. We have a bit of a bad solder right there. Better fix this guy. Okay, well, that is a better fit. Our gear motor can now be straight in there. They should fit like that. Let's get that hot glue gun warmed up. That's what we want, is that sound. This takes a little messing around with. I'm going to bend this lever a bit. Gets a little less scientific around this point. And I know I said I like to have things serviceable and removable. I mean, hot glue is pretty easy to get out of there. I'm sure that there are people out there going, you need to draw some of that heat away from the hot glue. I didn't end up using this much at all last time, and everything seemed pretty firm. So, I don't know. That's how it goes, I guess. Second build. But I mean, it's the same idea. I think I might have just managed to like grind down the plastic underneath the switch plate a little flatter, so it was on there more flush and maybe it was a bit easier to make secure. But I mean, this is pretty good as long as I didn't ruin everything with too much heat on those switches. That's pretty good. I'm going to bend this a little bit more. I think I'm going to do my battery test again. I apologize. This is not a quick mod. There you have it. Flywheels go. And then the gearbox goes. I do want to grab this little switch here. I kind of like putting the switch back in. Well, it fills up a hole, obviously. But I liked how many people in the other video noticed that it was off. No way this will just fit first try. Oh yeah, I think I needed to grind out a lot of this stuff. That, let it close. Oh boy. I think we went way heavier on the glue this time. So we need to leave some of this ledge because we need something for the gearbox motor to sit on, but I don't think it's going anywhere. And we need that room. Ooh, we are pretty handy to closed here. Something's kind of sticking here. Let's find out what. Let's not pinch. Oh, I think we found out what. I was just gonna say, we don't want to pinch things too much. I really would like it. That motor would stay just like that. Ooh, we are closed up. Let's put a couple screws in this. You really want to listen and make sure you're still getting 2 clicks. Awesome. And you know what? This is one area. I'm going to bring out the other one here and just see how much cord we have, because I actually found this is like a really good amount of cord. Let's plug in our soldering iron again. Get our helping hands out here. Here's our connector. And this is the end that we want. And your positive is the squared off side. Your negative is the rounded side. Doesn't really matter. Do the negative first. This is where helping hands are very, 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 very handy. Trying to do this without them would be incredibly rough. A little bit of flux. There we go. Messy. Let's see if we can clean this up a little bit. Yeah, boy. Almost there. Sorry, I'm not being very YouTubey. I'm not being very chatty as I do this. It's definitely been a bit of a challenge. And weirdly, this one took longer than the first one. These blobs of solder that will not melt drive me bananas. And eventually, it fluxes. Ugh. Can't help but think that I need like a little bit more heat out of my soldering iron. I don't know. Oh, we don't need all that. We want to put some shrink around here to strengthen this connector. Huh. I don't hear a second click. So let's open this guy up, make some adjustments. A good reason that wasn't firing. I think my hot glue for that, I dremeled a bunch of this after the hot glue, and I'm pretty sure that just loosened it up. I'm gonna let that glue get nice and hot this time. Last time it was too cold. I'm going to see if I can get this glued back on. It definitely, hot glue is just fine to put this on my other one. I think I just got into trouble because of the vibrations. Let's let that dry before we do anything. I can clearly hear the two stages, so that's good. We have the blaster closed back up. Let's see if we can get this back together. I thought I had a retainer for this all printed, but that print did not work out. I'm printing that now. This mod of this second DDAR plaster, I feel like it took twice as long. I don't know. I could not tell you why, but I would swear that this one was harder. So we're almost across the finish line. This thing's going to be long. I feel like even with all the editing I'm going to do, this is going to be a long one, and I apologize. I know it could have been better. I wanted it to be better, but this one was a challenge. All right, my gears are there. All right, my trigger is still 2-stage. I had to open this up again last time because somewhere in kind of wiggling the gear motor to get these on, I accidentally, we shifted things around to a point where it was not working anymore. Which happens. That's the thing about modding too, is, and that's also why whenever anyone's like, bro, how much are you selling that? I don't know how comfortable I would be selling modded blasters to people who don't mod, or who aren't at least like really into Nerf, like to the point where they kind of know, hey, there's a very good chance that this modded blaster at some point is going to require some maintenance or work. Yeah, like it just isn't something you can provide to someone. There's just such a good chance it's going to need some work at some point, right? So I find that, I don't know, I find that tough. What do you think? Am I worrying too much about that? So I have a whole video around cutting this ring off and putting these gears in, but here's kind of a closer look just so you can see how the gears go in. There's a spring under here. These have little teeth on the flat side that face each other. That goes in like that, and it's all together. Once we have that in, we're going to put this ring back on. No wonder the DDAR made another one where this ring was hot swappable. It actually already feels like it's so close to being hot swappable, just as it is. All right. This is exciting. This took a long time. let's see what happens. So we don't have the retainer ring on yet. I'm printing that now. So I'm not going to fill this up. But let's see what happens. Oh, I'm nervous. Are you nervous? Well, you might be seeing those internals after all. This, when I released it, the flywheels did not spin down. Part of me almost wonders about maybe I should put in a little return spring or something just to like help this trigger get pushed back out. It might just be maybe I haven't sanded as much, or I don't have as much. I don't know. I got something going on here, obviously. I swear the first one went so smoothly. It went so smoothly. What do we got here? It kind of has to just be something that's making it too tight on this side. Oh. I think that this actually... I think this switch got pushed in so far that it jammed. Like it was maybe a bit too tight. Okay, we're not actually dremeling what I thought we'd be dremeling. I guess this build's a little bit different, but that's okay. We are going to try to relieve some of the pressure on this switch, and we're going to make a little bit of room where this gets pushed in. I feel like so much of it at this stage is like just careful tinkering. I'm gonna even do a bit more. But I feel like this is already a great example to the question of, you know, will you sell me one of these? Like this one's too finicky. Like the other one I think is really, really solid, but I can't see myself selling this one to somebody. That'll do it. I'm also just gonna shave a little bit off the side of this. I said I wasn't going to give you a really close look, but I had to open it again. Here's a close peek just so you can see where some wires were tucked. Some underneath my kind of globby hot glue job, but it's keeping it all in place. The other one looks better inside, but we're not opening that back up. Hopefully close up you can hear this click. Two-stage. Okay, so we got it fixed. When everything's together, this gearbox is pressed down like this quite a bit. And before, that was making the button on this switch be pushed in so far, it was getting stuck. Now I think we are good. So we're going to close this back up again and see how it goes. It's pretty wild to have two of these. I printed a version of my retainer for the darts. I had a weird bed adhesion problem. The front facing part looks bad. I'm just going to lightly tack it on though, just because I want to finish filming this guide now. So I will likely replace this after. I'll just use a couple tiny dabs of glue. The other thing I'm going to be changing by the time you download this, hopefully, is I don't need all this material. Basically, these two nubs right here can come off. So we just don't need them. We don't have them on this version. We're going to get rid of them on the final version. So for now, I'm just going to Dremel them off. So this is more like what the final shape will be. Installing this is very easy. This lines up with the existing little nubs. And when you do glue this in, I mean, you can decide how snug you want it to be. I wanted it to be pretty snug. When I attached the other one, I used some super glue. I put a healthy dab of super glue on each tab, each and every one, and then I kind of used pressure and held them in place until they quick set, and then they were pretty sturdy. I'm just going to put a couple dabs of hot glue on this one because this print looks like garbage. but that goes with the theme of this cursed mod guide. So we're just gonna roll with it, and I'll replace it after. Double trouble. And that, you guys, is the mod. This has already been way too long. I know I struggled. We'll see in the edit how much of my struggle I leave in. But I'll probably leave most of those problems in because if you have those problems, I want it to be able to help you. As it stands now, my new one, the trigger is a little bit more sensitive than the other one. That could be adjusted just by bending the lever on the second switch if I wanted to. As you could tell, I was done. And I still have to go and replace this print, but it'll work for now. I hope you enjoyed this guide. Find yourself a D-Dart. Do this. It's a ton of work, but I will say it is definitely worth it.